One of the most polarizing names in college football over the last 5 years has definitely been Adrian Martinez. In some people's eyes, he was a Heisman contender, while others view him as one of the biggest busts ever. He has a crazy story coming out of high school, and in the last few years, he's been committed to or at 4 different schools. After an insane recruiting story, he went on to Nebraska where he had an up and down career, and many labeled him as an extreme disappointment. Well, it turns out maybe he wasn't so bad after all, as he's putting up huge numbers at Kansas State, has saved his career, could have an NFL future, and has a small chance at maybe winning the Heisman right now. In today's video, we're going to talk about the rise of Adrian Martinez, go through his career so far, and ultimately how he has saved it all. But before we get into it, we're on the road to 100K, so be sure to hit the subscribe button, leave a like if you want to support today's video, turn on notifications so you never miss when I upload, and let me know what player I should do next. Now let's talk about the rise and rebirth of Adrian Martinez. In order to understand how Martinez saved his career, we first need to talk about how his career rose. He grew up in the Sunshine State of California, but at 10 years old, his life was anything but sunshine. His mother would die of cancer, and this was devastating for many reasons, as she was his role model. He said, quote, "We didn't really know what it was. She was in a lot of pain, and she was actually working on a case that she really wanted to finish, so she refused to go to the doctor. Eventually we got her there, and it was about 2 weeks after that she got diagnosed and passed away. It was kind of a surprise. We weren't really expecting it to be anything much, and it turned out to be something really big. Adrian always loved football, and he put all of his anger and motivation into the sport, and when he arrived at Clovis West High School in Fresno, with a mix of hard work and talent, he quickly won the starting job, and college scouts began to take notice. Martinez blew up in the California high school system, and he decided he was going to stay in state and commit to the California Golden Bears over schools like Missouri, Colorado, Oregon State, and Washington State. He was sold on Cal because of offensive coordinator Jake Spavital and the Berkeley vibe. He said, quote, "Once I got there, I had a feeling that it was for sure and that it was the place I wanted to be, even on a rainy day. I thought it was the best place for me." Fun fact, Spavital is now the head coach at Texas State. At the time, Martinez was only a 3-star recruit, but in no time, he became a blue-chip player and everything would change. As a junior, Martinez would have a huge year, as he threw for 2,562 yards, 25 touchdowns, and 4 interceptions, running for nearly 1,500 yards and 14 more scores on the ground. He started to get a ton of big-time offers, and even Alabama offered him. Interestingly enough, Ohio State was also going to offer him, but then Martinez would get hurt, and despite not getting that one at first, a ton of big programs wanted his talent, but the orange and white stuck out to him, and Cal was now in the rearview mirror. He'd eventually fall in love with Tennessee, and chose to flip and commit to Butch Jones. He said, quote, "Honestly, I felt like it was home, you know? I formed a really good connection with Tennessee's quarterbacks coach and Coach Butch Jones. They really made me feel like a priority and stuck with me and were consistent throughout the whole process. Once I got to visit and kind of get a feel for things, I just really felt like I could make an impact and that Tennessee was the best college football has to offer." Just like the Cal commitment, no one knew what was actually going on, and many fans and recruiting analysts speculated that Martinez was going to decommit. USC eventually started to pursue him pretty hard and wanted him to visit. He said, quote, "It's just the way recruiting is now. I don't think it could hurt for me to go take a visit." This would create a firestorm, but eventually he took to Twitter saying, quote, "No matter what I said, I am all in on the University of Tennessee and can't wait to play for Coach Jones." Sure, he had made his pledge, but the 2017 season would change everything for him. Butch Jones had a horrific campaign at Tennessee, while Scott Frost had a breakout season at UCF and was going to get a bigger job. Butch Jones was fired later in the season, and things in Martinez's recruitment would heat up. He said, quote, "I can't say I'm 100% that I'm going to sign there on December 20th. That's where I want to be, but with everything going on, I just don't know 100%. I guess even Ohio State got back into the picture, as apparently Martinez said he was down to the Buckeyes in Tennessee, but with him, you never really knew what was going to happen next. After being wishy-washy on that Tennessee commitment for quite a while, Nebraska hiring Scott Frost changed the game. Frost apparently looked at his tape and said Martinez was the only quarterback in America he wanted. He proved that on the recruiting trail and threw everything but the kitchen sink at him. The problem for Tennessee was Adrian did not fall in love with Jeremy Pruitt, it seemed. Nebraska came really hard on Martinez, offering him a proven explosive offense and the chance to play early on. He received in-home visits from both Tennessee and Nebraska, getting to know each staff, and Frost won the battle. He would eventually decommit and flip to Nebraska, and it was a tough couple days for Tennessee. They also lost Michael Penix Jr. as he decommitted, flipped to Indiana, became a good player there, and now is surging at Washington. Tennessee lost both their future star quarterbacks, but Adrian didn't really care. He was just excited to be a Husker. He would commit there, and the hype began. His ranking probably could have been higher, but he would have to sit out his senior year due to a shoulder injury, but he was still a big deal, as according to 24/7 Sports, he was a 4-star recruit, the number 7 dual threat quarterback, and the 139th best player in the class of 2018. So, after a whirlwind of a recruitment, how would he do as the gem and poster child of the Scott Frost era? Martinez would arrive and would immediately be named the starting quarterback. His freshman season was all over the place. He had a debut of 3 touchdowns and a loss to Colorado, had 3 touchdowns and a loss to Wisconsin, and then had an insane day against Ohio State. He combined for nearly 350 yards with 3 scores against the Buckeyes, and Nebraska only lost by 5 points on the road. He'd have 4 touchdowns against Illinois, 3 touchdowns against Iowa, and he was a magical player. Despite Nebraska starting out 0-5, he ended up leading them to wins in 4 of their last 6 games, and was the best freshman quarterback in the country. He threw for 2,617 yards with 17 touchdowns, and 629 yards and 8 scores on the ground. This is when all that Adrian Martinez Heisman stuff started, and many believed that Nebraska was going to have their breakout 2019 season. Unfortunately, things did not go according to plan. They ended up losing in week 2 to Colorado and got obliterated by Ohio State, and after a 3-2 start, Martinez would struggle and Nebraska would end up missing a bowl game. He would throw for 1,956 yards with 10 touchdowns and 9 interceptions. He was still pretty good on the ground though, as he had over 600 yards and 7 touchdowns. This was a sophomore slump for him, but in 2020, he'd have an opportunity to bounce back. Unfortunately, it wasn't that great of a year. In 7 games, he finished with 1,055 yards, 4 touchdowns, and 3 picks. He once again did well on the ground with 7 scores there, but at one point, Martinez was even benched, and Nebraska struggled to a 2-4 record. So far, through 3 years, Martinez had shown flash, but could never put it all together or win games, and was now struggling to keep his starting spot. Going into the 2021 season, Martinez was hopeful though. He said, quote, "There's been a lot of ups and downs for sure over my career here, and I just want to leave it all out there, and not just for me. I think it's a prove-it year for us as a team, and there's a lot we're capable of. It doesn't mean it's going to be easy. You have to work for it, prove it to each other, and prove to this state and everybody else." So, how would it go for him? Well, he combined for nearly 400 yards in week 0 against Illinois, but they would drop that game by 8 on the road to the Illini. He'd helped them beat both Florida and Buffalo, before he'd have 2 touchdowns and a close loss to Oklahoma. Close losses became the norm for them. He had 2 touchdowns and an overtime loss to Michigan State, had 4 touchdowns and a 3-point loss to Michigan, had 1 score and a road loss to Minnesota, 3 touchdowns and 4 interceptions and a close loss to Purdue, 2 touchdowns and a loss to Ohio State, and then 2 touchdowns and a 7-point loss to Wisconsin. As many have already talked about, Nebraska was one of the most unlucky teams in college football history last year, as they always kept it close but couldn't seem to win. Martinez would miss their game against Iowa, and Logan Smothers would take over from there. Nebraska would miss a bowl game for the 4th straight year, and Martinez was labeled as a bust, a disappointment, and Nebraska fans were ready for him to go. After becoming one of the most scrutinized players in Nebraska football history, Adrian would enter the portal in search of one last opportunity. He said, quote, "The University of Nebraska will always be a place I call home. It has been an honor and privilege to represent the N for 4 years, and I want to thank Coach Scott Frost, the quarterback's coach, and the rest of the staff for a great opportunity to play for such a great university. Thank you to my teammates and lifelong friends for making my time here special. Thank you to the people of Nebraska for your continued support throughout my journey." In this time as a Husker, Martinez would throw for 8,495 yards, 45 touchdowns, and 35 interceptions. He also ran for over 2,000 yards and 35 scores during his 4 years in Lincoln, but unfortunately, while he had good stats, he didn't have a lot of wins. Still though, someone was more than likely going to take a chance on him. Some thought he'd go back home to Fresno State, and some even thought Cal. But Fresno State regained Jake Haener, and Cal would eventually get Jack Plummer from Purdue. So he had now left, but why did he leave? Well, the things that plagued him during his time were both knee and shoulder injuries, struggle with downfield passing, he had trouble fumbling the ball, and at the end of the day, he just couldn't win. Also added in the fact that seemingly the coaching staff was very dysfunctional, and it was a perfect storm for Martinez to struggle. But he would eventually get another opportunity at another Power 5 school. Coach Chris Kleiman in Kansas State wanted him, and he decided to commit to the Wildcats because of the staff, the opportunity to play, and his girlfriend played soccer there. The Wildcats had just recently lost Skylar Thompson to the NFL, and I guess Jake Rubley was not ready to take over quite yet. So Martinez was labeled as a complete disappointment, but halfway through the 2022 season, it looks like Martinez was never the problem after all, and he has been insane at Kansas State. In week 1, they'd play against South Dakota, and Martinez would have 1 touchdown and a 34-0 win. In week 2 against Missouri, Martinez would admittedly struggle, but he would have a touchdown, and he led them to a 40-12 blowout. Through the first 2 weeks, Martinez could have been better, and he'd have his worst game of the season against Tulane, as they would lose 17-10, and he'd only have 1 touchdown in that game. All of a sudden, Martinez decided he was going to get it together for when things really mattered. 2 weekends ago against number 6 Oklahoma, he would put on a show. He threw for 234 yards with a touchdown, but his biggest impact was in the ground game. He ran for 148 yards and 4 touchdowns, including 2 late scores that eventually sealed the upset over the number 6 Sooners. Martinez put on a show on a national stage and would continue that the following weekend against Texas Tech. The Cats were now ranked in the top 25, and against a hot Texas Tech team, he'd throw for a touchdown and run for 3 more. He finished with 171 yards on the ground and 116 yards through the air, and in his last 2 games, he has 9 touchdowns. He's also led them to 2 great victories, and Martinez is having a huge year. He currently has 12 touchdowns through 5 games and has nearly 1,200 all-purpose yards. With Chris Kleiman's coaching, star running back in Deuce Vaughn, and an experienced dual-threat quarterback in Adrian Martinez, K-State looks to be in terrific shape, and they could have an insane season. All of a sudden, bettors are starting to notice his play as well, as he has jumped both Jalen Daniels and Stetson Bennett in the Heisman odds, and now according to FanDuel, is only behind CJ Stroud, Caleb Williams, Bryce Young, and Hendon Hooker. This is absolutely insane, and while there are other sites that aren't as high on him, the fact that this guy is a top 5 Heisman contender according to Vegas odds is just insane. He's making highlight plays, winning games, and playing at the level we all knew Martinez could play at. Overall, it looks like he just needed a fresh start, and it's starting to make Nebraska look silly. But it was probably a mix of a bunch of things, but overall, I'm just very happy for him. He saved his career, and the sky is now the limit for him. And I'm very curious to see how he'll do for the remainder of the year. But what do you think? If you're a Kansas State or a Nebraska fan, what are your thoughts on Adrian Martinez? If you're a fan of another school, what do you think of Martinez? Give me another player or topic I could cover in my next video, and be sure to leave a like, subscribe if you're new, and check out all my other videos on the end screen.